Insight. Anyway, so let's go back to Insight, and now I'm going to tell the software Insight, well, don't visualize a school grade. Now let's visualize a quantitative variable, right? School grade is a qualitative variable, right? It's a categorical variable. It's names, A, B, C, and D. Those are also values, but they are not numbers. Reading 2013 is a quantitative variable. It's a continuous variable. It goes from 0% up to 100% with all the steps in between, right? So Insight is going to visualize it differently, as you may notice in just 1 second. I'm going to select it, and the graphic that I get is a dot plot that we could also call a histogram. Let me explain how to read this chart. It's actually quite compelling. Each one of these dots corresponds to one school. The position of each one of these dots on the horizontal axis corresponds to the percent of students on that particular school who could read well. So for instance, on these schools here that you have on the right end of the spectrum, a huge majority of the students are reading correctly. Nearly 100% of the students on this school were reading correctly in 2013. If you go to the other end of the chart, these 4 schools over here, on those 4 schools, no students were reading at grade level. Just 0% of the students were reading at grade level. And then most schools are somewhere in between. Most schools are clustered here in the middle, in between the 40% threshold and the 65% threshold, so to speak. Right? Those are the percentages of each one of these schools. So each dot is a school, right? So this is showing us the shape of the data, the distribution of the data, and also the range of the data. The range of the data is the minimum value and the maximum value of this distribution. In this case, the minimum value is 0%. There are schools in which no students read well, and 97% or something like that. That's the maximum number. That's the best school in terms of reading in our distribution. The other chart that you're seeing is this one down here. This is called a box plot. A box plot is a great way to summarize the distribution of a variable. The box plot basically tells you the same that you're seeing on the histogram, but in a different way. The box plot is read this way. This end of the box plot over here, this represents the minimum value, right? Is 0%. And then this end of the box plot over here, of this line, this is the maximum value of the distribution. And then these lines that define the box itself, these are called the quartiles. The quartiles are the values in any distribution that divide that distribution into 4 portions of the same size. That's quite of a mouthful, so let me explain it a different way. What the box plot is telling you is that 1/4 of schools in Miami-Dade are here, right? They have a percentage of students who can read correctly between 0% and 30-something%. So 25% of the schools are here. Another 1/4 of the schools in Miami-Dade are between this line and this other line. This is the first quartile and this is the second quartile, also called the median, which is a kind of average, right? So another 1/4 of the schools are over here. Another 1/4 of the schools are over here, and then another 1/4 of the schools are over here. So the box plot, basically what it does is to summarize the range of the data, but also shows you how concentrated or how dispersed the schools are in comparison to that average, the median there in the middle. If you want to see the numbers, by the way, behind any of these charts that I'm creating, Insight lets you do that. If you click on Summary up here, Insight will show you the numbers behind that chart. So it will show you the minimum value is 0, the maximum value is somewhere over here, 97, the first quartile is 37, the second quartile, which is the median, is 52 point something, the third quartile, which is the 75 percentile, is 68, and then the mean is that, and the standard deviation is that. We don't need to worry about that if you know nothing about the stats, but if you work with the stats, this also displays the standard deviation of the data. And then the sample size, which is basically the total amount of schools that we have in our data set, which is 400 and something. It's called the number of observations, right? Anyway, we have discovered that schools in Miami-Dade are very unequal, right? We have schools in which students perform really well in reading and schools in which students don't perform that well in reading, right? We could do something similar with math, right? So I could go over here, and what it says, select first variable, instead of visualizing reading, I can visualize math. And this will show me the distribution of math percents. And this is actually quite more compelling because I can see 2 different facts that look quite promising. First of all, a as potential stories to tell from the data. For instance, I want to know what those schools are. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe that 8 schools, something like that, in which no students can do math at grade level. Why? I don't know. All right, the visualization never gives you the answer. It's just giving you a clue to something that you can further explore later on. You can, again, pick up the phone, call the school system and say, hey, what is going on in these schools, right? That no students do math well. And then on the other hand, you have one school over here that departs from the rest of the schools. Most schools are down here, but suddenly you have an outlier. You have one school in which all the students, 100% of the students, score perfectly at math. They are all do math at grade level. What is that school? Again, I don't know, but it's worth exploring. What's going on, right? One thing, by the way, one feature, great feature of Insight is that I can find out what that school is, right? This chart that you have over here is completely static, but I can make it interactive. I can go over here, I can go to interactive plot, and then produce plot, and the chart will eventually appear over here. It usually takes a while because the software, again, is online and it will depend on your internet connection. Here we have the interactive version, and then you can plot more variables, right? You can say, for example, variables to display, you can display them all, and then you can hover over and see the actual scores over here. You can also see the table. And any plot that you produce in Insight, this is just an aside, you can download. For example, the interactive plot that I'm seeing right now can be downloaded as an HTML file, and the static plot that I had before can be downloaded either as a JPEG, a PNG, a PDF, or an SVG. These two formats, PDF and SVG, will help you later on to bring this chart into other software tools such as Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or InDesign or any other design tool to style the chart a little bit more. So you can download any chart that you create in Insight. Now, the same way that I did before, if I see these charts with so many potential compelling stories, what I do is to take a screenshot of them or print them out and actually write notes, like reminders to myself, things to look for, right? So these are some notes that I wrote about these charts. What is this school? What is that school over there? Why no students are reading correctly over here? Why are not so many students doing math correctly over here? Those are potential stories, right? Things that we have discovered thanks to the visualization. We don't have the story, but we have the clue to find impossible stories in the future.